So, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Marcio Cots, and today we have the pleasure to host Aaron Weller. Hello, Aaron. Hope you are doing fine.
I'm doing great, thanks. Hope you are too.
Okay, that's great. We're going to wait like 3 or 4 minutes just to be sure that everybody will be able to join us. So, we'll start in a few minutes, okay? And But before we start, Aaron, what are we going to talk about today? So I would appreciate if you could give us an overview of what we are going to see here today.
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the market for privacy professionals in the US. Talk a little bit about what I've seen from the evolving market for different kinds of skills and the types of roles that people are looking to fill. Talk a little bit about some of the things that I think are important if you're just starting out in the field or looking to get into privacy from an adjacent area, so something that has something in common. And then a few predictions for kind of where privacy is going to go in the next 5 years in the US, and just to give you a sense of kind of where I see the market developing.
Nice. Yeah, I have many questions on this topic. As most of you know, I'm a European data privacy professional, and I have also worked in Brazil. But I'm very interested in knowing how things will look like in the US in a couple of years. Not only the regulation, but also the market, as you said, because I feel that the way that Americans see data privacy is quite different than Europe. It's not just the regulation, the way you see it and the market feels and act or react, um, regarding data privacy. It seems to be a little bit different. So it's always great to hear an American data privacy professional talking about the market and the regulation. That would be great. So, as I said, we'll start in a couple of minutes just to be sure that everybody will be able to join us. Just let me check. Guys, I would appreciate if you could send us just a message, just let us know that you can hear and see us. So I would appreciate if you could send us a message. I know that we have a delay, so we'll have to wait sometimes even 1 minute until we get some feedback. Have to wait. Yeah, very good. Yeah, people were starting to reply. Thanks, Sanjeev, Carlos. Yeah, great to know that you guys can hear and see us. So I think that we are set and we can start. So as I've said before, my name is Marcio Cots. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for GetGlobal International. I'm an European data privacy lawyer working outside the US now. And we have the pleasure to have Aaron Weller here today. Aaron, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So Aaron is going to talk a little bit about, how to become a data privacy professional, especially in the US. So it's going to be great to hear from Aaron. Most of us, have the European point of view or even the opinions from the Europeans about data privacy. So it's always good to know what's going on in the US and especially what's going on, in the American market itself. And I was just chatting with Aaron a little bit before we've started our event today, and he's going to give his opinion even on how he thinks that the market will be in 5 years from now on. So definitely it's going to be a great event. So once again, Aaron, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we are excited to hear and see your presentation.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the introduction. So yeah, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on my background and perspective before we get into the class, because I think this might help with kind of seeing where I'm coming from and where my perspective is derived from. So similar to Marcio, I actually grew up in Europe. You might be able to tell from the accent, in the UK. I lived in Australia for a while, and then since 2006, I've been in the US, California, and then Washington. I didn't start out in privacy. I think a lot of us who've been around for as long as I have in the field, there wasn't much in the way of kind of privacy courses at university at the time, and the profession was much less mature than it is now. My undergrad degree is actually in physics, with some business and management in there as well. I'm not a lawyer, although many people in my team are lawyers. Many people I work with are lawyers, and I've probably worked with enough lawyers for enough time that I can sound like a lawyer if I try. I actually got into privacy from information security, which was something that I'd worked in since '99. I actually got up to the point that I was running security programs for several companies before I really shifted my focus towards privacy. I led PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC's privacy practice for the Western US for a number of years. And a lot of what I did was help organizations really think about what's the right program for their organization. I then led the Global GDPR Program Management Office for a big technology company. And now I'm running CCPA and kind of the things that come after CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, for several global companies in my current role, which is running a small technology privacy startup. So what we're going to cover today is really a little bit on, where do I see privacy in the US today? We'll talk a little bit about what I'm seeing in terms of, what roles are people hiring for. I also wanted to talk a little bit about what I call adjacent skill sets. So what are things where, if you're looking to become a privacy professional or kind of switch around within your career, what are some of the other areas where I've seen people make successful moves into privacy? I want to talk a little bit about what I think that companies are really looking for when they're looking to hire privacy professionals, and then give a few predictions on what privacy could look like in the US 5 years from now. And Marcio, if you have questions or kind of you want to interject as we go through, please feel free as well. So liven up the conversation. So I want to touch on, as Marcio said, a lot of you on the call may be from outside the United States, and you're kind of looking for, that US perspective. And I think that it's interesting if you look at the differences between the way that privacy works in the US and a lot of the rest of the world. One of the fundamental differences comes down to, in many parts of the world, privacy is seen, or has been seen for years, as a human right. So it's baked into GDPR, for example. There's a lot of these rights of the individuals. And GDPR famously says you're not allowed to process personal information at all unless you have a legal reason for doing so. That's in contrast with in the United States, where a lot of our legal system is based around the concept of harm to individuals. So it's not just that you have these innate rights to privacy, but really what regulators, attorney generals, and others are looking for is, did a breach of your privacy actually result in harm to you as an individual? And then that's often been a challenge in proving lawsuits, has been, how do you really show that some of these harms, which can seem fairly intangible, actually can then have a monetary value assigned to them? So the harms versus rights is kind of one of those big differences. And as we've seen with GDPR and then with CCPA and some of the other laws that are emerging in the US, there is more of a little bit of a move towards giving consumers some of these rights that Europeans have now enjoyed for a couple of years. The right to being able to access information a company has about you, or have that information deleted, or get it changed if it's wrong. But that's a really new concept for the US. And at the moment, that's really only available in California. Although one of the other interesting things about the US is that they call the states, the individual states, the laboratories of democracy. And really what I take that to mean is that you can try a lot of different experiments in how to do things in different ways. And if something's very successful, then it tends that will then go across all of the other states as well. And we saw this over the last probably 10 plus years with data breach laws. So California came out with the very first data breach law, SB 1386, and then gradually other states adopted similar variations that if a company has a security breach, they've got to notify people that that happened and provide some guidance around what they should do to protect themselves. So because the states are very different, Florida is very different from Washington, Nevada is very different from New York. It means that there's lots of different approaches and views around the importance of privacy and how privacy should be seen. So this is a map that my team put together back in earlier this year. And one of the interesting things that's happened this year, of course, is we've had a lot of focus on COVID and now the US election coming up in a couple of months. While there was a lot of activity in many states earlier this year to be looking at privacy laws, and even at the federal level as well, there hasn't really been much movement in the last few months because of other priorities. And my first prediction will be that there won't really be any more progress in 2020. Whoever wins the election, there's going to be a lot of focus on that and worrying about things associated with that and the ongoing pandemic. So the situation in the US right now is not only do we have laws at that state level, but we also have these sectoral laws for pretty much every sector you can think of. So financial services has its own laws, healthcare providers have their own laws around protecting privacy. So if you actually go and study for a certification like the CIPP US, you'll see that there is this kind of patchwork of laws at the state level, laws at the sector level, but you can think that a lot of large companies may have payments information plus some medical information of their employees. So you often end up with trying to comply with multiple laws from a single company's perspective. And from a privacy professional, that can actually be really interesting because it means you get into things, if you're looking at marketing, you have to deal with laws like CAN-SPAM that regulate email marketing. So you've got a lot of these different things where there are different requirements in different places around the country, and then also depending on what kind of company you work in. Very different from kind of a European or actually a Brazilian or a lot of other countries where no matter what kinds of personal information you have, it's all protected and managed the same way. There's a lot of complexity in the way that it's managed in the US. So with that, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was then what are the roles that you would find within a typical privacy team? Because I think it's important to realize that if you go back 10 or 15 years, I was one of the very few non-lawyers in the privacy profession. Privacy was really seen as being, a legal compliance field. And although that's something that there is still a lot of importance around understanding the law, as the laws have got more complex and we've moved to some of these laws where we're having those data subject rights means that you need to be able to manage personal information across lots and lots of different IT systems at the same time. We've seen kind of this maturing of the profession and growing into several different kinds of roles. And this slide is really oversimplified, but just to give you a sense that really I see 3 pillars of a privacy program, where on one side we have lawyers or paralegals, people who understand the law, can interpret the law, they're familiar with new developments, they know what case law is, they really understand that side of privacy, potentially used to working with regulators, those kinds of skill sets. But as programs have matured and we need to get into, if we're looking at a new law that's rolling out, what do we need to do? How do we build a project plan? How do we make sure that all of those new requirements actually get implemented? There's been the rise of a need for people with real program management skills. And I think while I have come across some lawyers that are really good at program management, it is its own skill set. And hiring people who both understand privacy, but also are really good at actually going and getting things done and enabling other people to get things done is a key component as what you need to do in the field of privacy becomes more complex. And then the other silo that I have there, the other piece of the team, that if you're building a privacy team, is people with really those technical skill sets, not necessarily people who are going to be embedded within your IT department and actually going and making changes to systems themselves, but they have to be able to speak that language and be able to work with teams who are, working with big data environments or across lots and lots of different systems, working with the marketing teams and understanding kind of how online advertising and marketing works. So having kind of that breadth of skills that can really be talking to teams that are using personal information in their own language, not the language of the lawyers, but kind of being able to then go and work and help those teams get things done in a way that's then going to allow those legal requirements to be met. So as I said, this is really a simplification, but you can see that there has become kind of this split between, you can't really expect one privacy professional to be very good at everything. As I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer. I would say that with my background, I do have more skills on the technical side. I understand a lot of the laws, but I can't give you legal advice about them. And from the program management perspective, something I've done in my past, but really now I have program managers who work for me who deal with those kind of things. The role that I've moved into more now, and I think is a viable career path for many people as privacy teams continue to grow, is to really then take on those privacy management roles where you're both in a position of managing people, but then also kind of managing the expectations of the rest of the business as you tell them, you can't use data in that way, or, we need a new additional budget to go and to comply with a new law that's just come out, or a way that the business is using data. So I think that the opportunity for privacy professionals is growing, and also there's lots of different roles that people can do with different backgrounds, which I think is really important.
Yeah, Errol, there are two questions here, and it seems that they are, very good questions regarding what you've just said. One of them is from Carlos, the GetGlobal Foundation course address CCPA and data breach states law. Is that enough? I mean, I feel that what he's asking is pretty much if by knowing CCPA and the data breach state laws, would that be a good start to become a data privacy professional in the US?
Yeah, I think it's a great starting point. I think it depends what kind of an organization you're working at. So if you're working for a healthcare provider, you'd need to understand HIPAA, you'd need to understand high tech probably, which are laws that are specific to that industry sector. So in addition to the ones that you mentioned, because there are laws for the educational sector or the government that are very different in what their requirements are, understanding those specific laws as well as the general ones that you mentioned that would apply to your particular company. I would also say that you should look at, most organizations do some kind of marketing. So understanding kind of those marketing requirements as well, not just things like CAN-SPAM that regulates email marketing, but the laws around TCPA, for example, which is the Telecom Communication Preferences Act. So it's how can you actually contact people over phones or text messages? Those things could be really important as well, depending on what your role is. So I would say that those laws that you mentioned are a good baseline, but then you're probably going to need to understand additional things on top as well, depending on what kind of role you're doing.
Yeah, and depending on the sector you want to work. Yeah.
Yep.
One more question here. And data privacy, is it different in the US or I think it's data privacy management. Is it different in the US or the same in the Europe? What he means is the same kind of management skills that I need to have to work in Europe. Is it pretty much the same thing that you have to do in the US?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I work with companies that are global. One of my clients is based in Switzerland. So, I'm working with a lot of European privacy professionals as well. And I think, particularly for larger organizations, management skills are very transferable. I think that that's something where, although the things that you're doing may be different, probably the big change between Europe and the US may be, how do you influence executives to give you the right funding for the program when you don't have, necessarily that, depending on what sector you're in, the big stick of kind of a GDPR level fine that may say, we need to have another 3 people in the program because otherwise, we could be fined. It's not necessarily the same in the US, but aside from that piece, a lot of the management skills would be very similar.
Yeah, when we say manage privacy, means that we are going to manage process, people, and by managing people, we need to understand a little bit about the culture because if you don't know anything about the culture, it's going to be hard to manage people. So at the end of the day, you definitely need to have the legal knowledge. You need to know how to manage privacy, have some knowledge on information security and technical skills. But the law changes, the way you are going to manage things change. Maybe the technical skills, they are more hard skills and not so much soft skills. So that might be a little bit similar. But regarding the legal aspects and how you are going to manage privacy, that changed a little bit. Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, kind of to my point that we were just talking about, I think there are a lot of skills that are applicable outside of privacy, and I think I could add management to this slide as well, that work very well in a privacy context. What I mean by SMENIS, which is something that one of my clients used years ago and I really liked, was that's the subject matter expert. It's actually knowing privacy, knowing the details of what you need to do. Like, how do you do a privacy impact assessment? You know, when do we need to do a DPIA? All of those things around understanding, you know, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That's the piece that's unique to privacy. But really, I see that a lot of the other skills around, you know, being able to get a project done on time, being able to communicate and work well with other teams, all of those skills don't necessarily, you know, are unique to privacy professionals. And I think that gives us some good, you know, avenues to be looking at how can we hire people or bring people into the team who may not have much of the SMENIS, they may not know very much about privacy to start off with, but you can help them get into the field by starting off with, you know, the skills that they do have that they can reuse in privacy as well. And that leads me on to kind of talking about what I call adjacencies, which is really, it's teams that you may work with that have some crossover in the skills that you'll need. So Marcio just mentioned information security, legal. There's a lot of people that I've hired in the past who come from one of these other teams. I originally, before I got into information security, I came from an audit background and compliance, and, you know, trying to understand, you know, how do you measure whether things are working? And I think that those skills can be very helpful. I often say to people that I actually think that teaching someone privacy is relatively easy. If I have a good project manager, I can teach them privacy. But if I have a good privacy professional, it's not always that easy to teach project management. So I would rather have someone who has the enthusiasm that comes from one of these other teams, that knows the organization that we're working in, and we can build up those privacy skills over time. If you think about it, in the US, because CCPA, the California law, only came into effect this year, you know, we only knew about it maybe a year before that. No one is really an expert, right? We're all learning as we go. And I think with a lot of these new laws, you're only by understanding these fundamentals and kind of, you know, that we need to give people, you know, tell people what they're doing with their data, you know, find their data if they ask for it, you know, have a good training program. A lot of these things are things that you can learn or know about how to do today, and then put in those specific legal requirements on top of that, you know, to deal with a specific situation. So what I really see is that there's a lot of opportunity as privacy is really growing as a profession for people who are already doing something there's a little bit of overlap with what we need to do from privacy. And I think that can be a good starting point for a career as well, to move within a company from one of these teams. So Carlos, you asked another question about, do people address DPIAs and carry on privacy by design in the US? So at the moment, there is no requirement for privacy by design similar to GDPR in the US. However, if you don't do it, a lot of other things can go wrong. And you've also got to think that a lot of US companies that are multinational built their global privacy program on GDPR. So as GDPR requires DPIAs and privacy by design, a lot of larger US companies will be doing those things because their whole program is based on what the work that they did for GDPR as well. So the Washington state law that was proposed that didn't get passed earlier this year would have been the first US state law to actually require privacy by design. And the chances are that next year there will be laws passed in the US that formally require privacy by design. But so I've seen that some companies are doing it already, even though there isn't necessarily a legal requirement, unless you work for the government, where there are some standards around doing impact assessments before you release new products or services that use personal data. So it's really a mix right now. There isn't that legal requirement, but a lot of companies are still doing it anyway. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what companies are really looking for when they're looking to hire people into or grow a privacy team. And I think, I'm slightly laughing when I say, well, of course, everyone wants everything. But, that's not really fair when someone's like, well, how do I get that? How do I really start off? And I think that, so from my perspective, privacy in the US, it's still a relatively small community. I know when I started off, there's a lot of people that I've known for a long time that kind of we all know each other because there wasn't that many people around in privacy 10 years ago. But even now, as the profession's grown significantly, it's still a pretty small community. And I found that people are very open to giving their time and kind of helping people out who are looking to break into the field. This is a list that I adapted from an article that I liked with, how can you break into a field where you don't necessarily have the experience, but you are enthusiastic and you want to, you want to get in and kind of work out how to do that. So, I get a lot of people reaching out to me through various channels, and some of them, if they're really, they're explaining kind of where they are, what are they looking to do, how can I, what would I suggest they do next? What would I suggest from a certification perspective? I think you'll find that a lot of people are open to some of those connections. A lot of people are really, really busy. So it might take a few weeks to reply, but I think making sure that you're providing kind of an opportunity for someone to really answer a specific question. If you just ask me, well, how do I get a job in privacy? That's really, really hard to answer. Saying, this is kind of my background. These are the things that I've done. This is kind of what I've been looking at from a privacy perspective. What kind of roles do you think I'd be good at? It's much easier for someone to then, say, oh, what about, you should talk to this person or you should have this conversation. And I think that, at least in English, that the word relationship is a verb. It's a doing word. So relationships are things that it's not just one time and done. If you're building a relationship with someone or kind of building your network, it's really important not to bug people, but to make sure that you're checking in, you're liking people's content that they share, you're interacting with it. You're making people see that you're actually interested in ongoing interest in the field, so that it's not just one email and then you're done. From a what should you know perspective, I think a lot of these things that you can build without necessarily having privacy experience yourselves. I think the certifications, the CIPP certifications and the rest of them, they've really improved over the last few years. I think as more people have taken them, they've got more feedback. I think they're generally a good starting point to show that you have some interest in the privacy field. They're not as intense to study for as a security certification like the CISSP with its 1,000-page book, but still they are some work depending on the level of knowledge you have already. But I think going and looking at the free resources that are out there, go and download the NIST, so the National Institutes of Science and Standards and Technology in the US, provides a lot of good resources that are free to download, even if you don't live in the US. And they talk about kind of privacy risks and key things you need to think about with privacy. That's a good free way that you can start building some of your knowledge, and then keeping track of what these developments are. You may have seen in the last couple of months, there's been a lot of talk around the new Brazilian law. And so I've gone through and read that. I actually have a briefing for one of my clients later today, on what are the differences between that law and GDPR. So even, working as a professional in the US, we still get involved in many of these issues outside of the US as well, if you're working with companies that have operations that go beyond kind of US borders. As I mentioned earlier, I think good program management is really important because as privacy gets more complicated and some of these laws, these requirements are really, really hard to comply with, you may have to work with a lot of teams to go and get a lot of the work done. It's really important that you can understand how to, manage a project, manage a program, because a lot of lawyers are too expensive or traditional outside counsel resources. You don't necessarily want to be paying those kinds of rates for program management, but somebody who's got that skill can really help those lawyers be more successful. Really understanding, to kind of Carlos's question around the privacy by design, understanding software development, thinking about what are the stages of the life cycle, where should privacy be involved, getting through, there's a lot of good case studies out there as well, particularly when things have gone wrong. So there's some good white papers around where this has been done badly. To the point I made earlier about communication skills, oftentimes in privacy, you're looking to get other people to do something that's going to improve privacy. Because personal information is used throughout organizations, often you're the ones going and asking, human resources departments or marketing departments to change the way they do things. You've got to be convincing and you've got to be able to say, this is why we should do these things. And this is why I think it's important for our overall goals. It's not just me saying you can't do something. So I think the strong communication skills and being able to show that you can influence people are really important too. From a management perspective, really being able to kind of think about, how do we prioritize a program? What's the right team? How do we staff that? How do we hire people? I think in the US, as I said, we don't really have the big stick of these very, very large fines like we do in some other parts of the world. So really thinking about how can we get a good program without necessarily spending a lot of money. And you have to make some really tough choices sometimes, but really being able to tell that good story about how does privacy fit into what a company does is key to then kind of that engagement and being able to influence people in a good direction. And then I think the last point there are, as privacy is changing so fast, although there's a lot of wrong answers, it's very rarely that you have one right answer to solving a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons for me that I really enjoy being in this field. It's because a lot of these things, like if you're doing a privacy by design assessment for artificial intelligence, right? The first time you go through and do that, you're like, how do I, what are the things I should look at? What are the things I should do differently from, if I'm doing privacy by design on a marketing campaign? So I think there's a lot of these things where we're going through and learning as a profession, especially as, we gather more data as a society, we use it in different ways. There's been a lot of concern about these COVID tracking apps the last few months, but a lot of it comes down to exactly the same privacy principles. What data are we collecting? How are we using it? Are we being transparent? Do we have secondary usage? A lot of these principles are very consistent just when you apply them to new technology. So I think being able to think through being comfortable with that ambiguity and be able to kind of work out, an answer to a new problem is very important as well. So with that, I wanted to give you a couple of my predictions for what privacy will look like in the US in a few years' time. I think it's fairly likely that something that has elements of CCPA and GDPR will be in place at the federal level, so across the whole of the US. And if you go and download and look through the Washington law that was proposed earlier this year, you can see that there are pieces in there that are very, very similar to GDPR. There are pieces that are more similar to CCPA. Something like that, I predict, will be in place at the federal level. one of the problems that we're going to have is that the proposals that I've seen so far for kind of a US-wide privacy law that incorporates some of these data subject rights from GDPR and CCPA is that in the US, and I think in other places as well, there's this concept of preemption. And what that means is that if you have a law at the US level, it may or may not, you have the choice, or when they pass the law, they have the choice about will it replace any similar laws or will it not? And at the moment, the way that these things have happened, and if you look at CCPA as a good example, there are a lot of carve-outs for if you already comply with HIPAA, which is a healthcare law, GLBA, which is a financial information privacy law. So what they're effectively doing is instead of replacing one law with another law, they're saying that you have to comply with this law, except if you comply with this other law. So it makes it kind of confusing. And what I've seen from the proposals so far is that a federal privacy law will effectively say, we're going to put these things in place across the whole of the US, but then they're going to allow the states to do their own thing as well. So I am concerned from a compliance perspective, that's going to make things even more complicated than it is now. And I worry that it may be something similar to what we've seen with data breach laws, where there are now over 50 different data breach laws in the US, rather than one law that's consistent in every single state. So I think that trend, unless they can really get some good backing and get rid of a lot of these current laws, it's going to result in a lot more confusion. One of the things that I've suggested in the past, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but I think would be a good idea, would be to pass a law at the federal level that just sets the definitions of, what is personal information, what is an access request. A lot of those things where otherwise we're going to get differences in the definitions. Believe it or not, even in California alone, there are a number of different laws that have different definitions of what personal information means. It makes it really confusing and very hard to comply. I also think that we're going to see some advances in ethical frameworks, particularly with respect to machine learning and artificial intelligence, and kind of how are we using those tools to process personal information and make decisions. I do think those are going to come out of industry because the big technology companies, in particular, Microsoft has already published an ethical AI framework, but I think that those are going to be more of an industry standard rather than a law. And then I don't know if you've been following the developments in California, but although CCPA only came into effect this year, there is an initiative on the ballot in November for the voters to vote on called CPRA, which is effectively rewriting CCPA to be closer to GDPR. So my prediction is that we're going to pass CPRA in November. It will then come into effect in 2023. And California, one of the things that I've heard or has been talked about is that one of the reasons for passing CPRA is that it'll then be more of a level playing field with GDPR, and potentially California could try and obtain adequacy just for California so that there could be free data transfers to California, which if you think about the recent Schrems decision, kind of the invalidation of Privacy Shield, that's just become even more important, and it would be a pretty big benefit to the California economy as well. So those are my predictions for the US. And I don't know, Marcio, if you said you've been in the US for a little while, do you have any other predictions as well for things that may change?
No, actually, I feel that those are pretty much what will happen in 5 years. That's also the way I see it. I think that US will definitely have a more comprehensive data privacy legislation. I don't think it's going to be pretty much like the GDPR, but it's going to get closer, and it's going to be a sort of GDPR with an American flavor. I don't see the US, recognizing data privacy as an individual's right, a fundamental right. It will still be a consumer right, and that changes a little bit the way you are going to deal with data privacy. That's the way I see it. But at the end of the day, it seems that the data privacy professional, even working in Europe or in Brazil or in Canada or in the US, they pretty much need the same kind of skills. You need to know the legal obligations, because those are the things that you need to tackle. You need to know how to do it, how to manage things in the organization in order to comply with the law. You also need to have some information security skills, just because you need to worry about the data protection. And you need two other skills that will make you a better data privacy professional that you have mentioned. One of them is soft skill, communication, and how to deal with different people in the organization. We don't want to be the no man or the no women. We want to work together with some other areas of the organization in order to make the company, move forward, respecting privacy, being more private centric. And soft skill definitely would be a plus. And the other one is technical skill. You have mentioned it and you have given two very good examples. And I usually say nowadays that you, as a data privacy professional, needs to you need to know a lot, about your organization's business, about your client's business. If you are a data privacy professional working for Fujitsu, IBM, Apple, those are innovative organizations. So innovation is the core business. So you need to know a little bit about blockchain, artificial intelligence, and IoT, Internet of Things, because you are going to address a lot of privacy by design. And you definitely will have to work with the organization in order to make those projects, comply with the data privacy legislation. If you are going to work for a very big retail organization, a very big e-commerce as Amazon or eBay, you definitely need to know a little bit more about digital marketing. So at the end of the day, it seems that even in Europe, Brazil, Canada, US, as I have mentioned it, or even in India, because India is, debating their data protection bill, and it seems that it's going to be a GDPR-like regulation, not exactly the same, but it will follow the European standard. At the end of the day, you pretty much need the same kind of skills. What makes things different is that the legislation is different. And when it comes to manage things, communication is a must. And for a foreigner to know, the American culture and the things are done in the US, it might be a little bit more complicated, and vice versa. But I feel that there is a great opportunity for data privacy professional to be global data privacy professionals. We have some global DPOs, because as a global DPO, I might be working for an American company, but this American company also does business in Europe or even in Brazil, in India, in Canada, in Australia. And I'll definitely have to learn a little bit about the data privacy regulation in those places. And I'll also have to learn some cultural aspect of every region in order to work with my local team and make this global data privacy management program work. So that's the way I see it. I think the US will be a very big and important market for data privacy professional in the future. I don't see that we are at this point right now. As you have said, it's a very small community of data privacy professional. We've started doing things in the US, and we've done some research on good professionals in the US. We definitely have find very good professionals, but it seems that they are all the same ones and you definitely is one of them. And you are, you are the professional who loves privacy, who is open to talk with different people, to have this relationship that you have mentioned it, and that's why we are here today. And we appreciate, to be able to be here with you and learn a little bit more about the U.S. There is one more question here, Aaron, from Sanjeev. Is Chief Privacy Officer, CPO, the highest position in privacy career ladder in the U.S.?
I'd say yes and no. I mean, if you want to be just a pure privacy professional, then yeah, the Chief Privacy Officer is usually the most senior person that's dedicated to privacy. Where I've seen the career go from there in some circumstances is I've seen people move from being a Chief Privacy Officer to being a Chief Compliance Officer. So then they own compliance across all the different kinds of things that compliance does for the whole organization. So I don't think that necessarily Chief Privacy Officer is the end of the career ladder if you want to go into a role that's not as focused on privacy. And I guess that's pretty true for a lot of other specialist roles, is that when you get to a certain point in your career, if you want to keep going up, into kind of the C-suite, you're going to need to get a broader view of things than just privacy alone.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, because the Europeans, they have a different point of view. They feel that the DPO, the Chief Privacy Officer, shouldn't be part of compliance, mostly because compliance process personal data, and someone outside the area needs to check if the compliance chief, the compliance area, is processing the personal data properly. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I would agree from a DPO perspective, but we don't really have the same DPO requirements that you do in Europe right now.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, we generally would see the role of internal audit as fulfilling that function of the independent kind of assessor of whether the privacy program is doing the right things. I also wanted to touch on one of the points that you raised around innovation, and I think that that's very, very important, and probably something I should have mentioned earlier, that a lot of US companies, if they're trying to do something with personal information that looks risky from a privacy perspective, what you may often hear is kind of, where's the harm? Like, what's the problem? People can often opt out, or they can, why should I not do this? It's going to be better for the consumer. So I think that does come back to what you were saying about kind of that change of mindset between Europe and the US, is that in Europe and in many other places around the world, with privacy as a human right, there's no question that privacy is always important and should be considered. Whereas from the US, where we're looking at this more from a consumer perspective, from a harm perspective, you will get that pushback from teams that are looking to use the data. And that comes back to what I was saying about kind of the communication and understanding, and even what Marcio was saying about the different cultures in different places, to be able to get people to still want to do privacy, even when they say, well, the harm might be fairly small.
Yeah. The other day I was talking with Victoria Beckman. She's a data privacy lawyer, and she said, for Americans, if the data breach doesn't involve social security number, my name, and my address, it's fine. I mean, no problem. So it's pretty much what you've just mentioned. Guys, just to let you know, Aaron has recorded a very good masterclass on how to manage data privacy. I have sent to you guys the link of Aaron's masterclass. So if you guys are interested, take a look at it. And Aaron, I want to play a video for you, and I would like your opinion. This video is pretty much on our Data Privacy Foundation course. The idea is to bring this, the kind of knowledge that this global data privacy professional, should have. So is it okay if I play the video and get your opinion at the end?
Yeah, let me stop sharing the slides. Okay. There we go.
Let me share mine. and see if it works. Here we go.
Yeah, we're not hearing the sound, Marcio.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good to know. Just for a second, please. Let me see what's going on. I might have to share the screen. Let me try once again. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Let me see if it works now. It should be working now.
Hello, my name is Marcio Cots. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for GetGlobal International. GetGlobal International is a data privacy consulting company and a training provider with operations in the US, Europe, and Brazil. We are bringing our courses to the online field, divided the program into different courses: the Data Privacy Foundation and the Data Privacy Practitioner. During the Data Privacy Foundation course, you will learn all aspects of the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, learning all the concepts of data privacy and all the definitions brought by the GDPR. You also learn everything that comprises the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, and how this state law impacts the use of personal data in the US and internationally. In addition, a comparison will be made between each aspect of the GDPR and the CCPA, showing where the two regulations are similar and different. Those who purchase the course will also receive cybersecurity online classes on demand with an information security specialist. In the Data Privacy Practitioner course, you will learn all the practical aspects brought by the data privacy regulations, learning to deal with the situations that these regulations propose through practical cases. You also learn the importance and how to implement a data protection management system under the GDPR and the CCPA. You also learn how to use a personal data management software and learn about practical aspects of building a privacy program. GetGlobal is an official ICSIN training provider. ICSIN is an European independent certifier, and one of its certification is the ICSIN DPO certification. DPO is the Data Protection Officer. To get an ICSIN DPO certification, you need to get 3 different trainings: the GDPR Foundation, the GDPR Practitioner, and the Information Security. After taking these 3 trainings, you'll be able to take the ICSIN tests. Therefore, our program covers more than what is asked from ICSIN for you to get the DPO certification. Thank you for joining us, and keep tuned.
Okay. So this is just an idea of how we see things. We definitely have changed it. Just to let you know, we have added the data breach state regulations, but I would like to know your opinion about this.
Yeah, I think that it's, I usually think of it as the what and the how. So that the what is all of the laws and kind of it was your left-hand side. But then I think the important thing as well is that you can know all of the theory, but not know how to build a program. So for me, that's kind of, having both of those two pieces together is really important for you to be successful as a professional. And I think that's where, as I was saying, you can start with kind of knowing how to get things done. That it could be anything that isn't privacy, and then learn the privacy, the water privacy as well. So I think you can start from either side, but yeah, having those two together is really important.
Very good. It's good to know your opinion about our program. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on our program. That's great. So for those who are interested about our Data Privacy Foundation course, I have also sent the link. And we are going to leave the link open for those who wants to enroll in for more 48 hours, because we already have students, and we don't want to take too many students, because we want to keep quality and be sure that we are going to be able to send you guys feedback. But that's pretty much it. So once again, Aaron, it was great having you here today. Once again, it was great to have your insights on how US is moving forward with data privacy, and we would appreciate your final considerations on our event today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to speak. Like I said, I think that it is an emerging field in the US. It's definitely, there's a lot of innovation and really interesting things happening with data in the US. And that for me is, even though the laws are maybe not quite where they are in other parts of the world, there's a lot of things that are changing. And that makes for an interesting career. Every day is something different.
Definitely. Thank you very much, and see you guys soon. Keep safe. Bye-bye.